So yeah, I'm a YouTuber again now. Don't get used to it. Also, because I cannot get away with putting out a year-end video in February, I'm not that unprofessional, you guys are gonna have to stick with this dollar store rock critic format I got going on here. Obvious disclaimers that should go without saying. Now, contrary to the clickbait title, this list contains nothing more than my subjective favorite albums of 2017. Arguing with it is pointless, especially because in the year where I officially retired my dollar store era TV format, I have long since exhausted the last of my caring when it comes to keeping up with the critical darlings or the consensus thereof. Also, on a less directly condescending to my viewers note, linked in the description are both my favorite single and my favorite deep cut from each of the list proper, as well as the Topsters Top 50 I'll be posting on my Twitter, though I will wait a few days on the latter just to avoid spoilers. Also, if you want more listy goodness, check out the latest episode of the Mad Sounds podcast where we talked about EPs, songs that should have been hits, and mostly used that time as an excuse to rant about revival. Anyway, honorable mentions. Okay, this is going to be a weird sort of slot section on this list. You see, this album's great, but I want to talk about specifically why it got knocked off the list proper. You see, it's a really bizarre case of the pieces being so much better than the whole. Like, you got a noise punk kiss-off next to a strutting empowerment bop next to an indie rock dating sim. You see what I'm getting at here? I'm not asking them to go full Coheed and Cambria with the concepts on us, but just any thought put into making this thing a cohesive piece of work would have easily put it on the list proper. Again, definitely worth checking out, but with all its highlights, really could have been something more! A damn great follow-up to my number 5 album of 2015. Van's sense of detail and raw pathos in his delivery and storytelling are as potent as ever, and the touches of pop and even new wave will only add to the tightness of it all. Really looking forward to Van's solo debut that's probably been released by the time this video goes up. Also, gotta love that album cover with the hand and all of the most misunderstood album of 2017. Guys, contrary to what you convinced yourselves, Beck's always had a pop sensibility. It frankly would have been weird if an album diving headfirst into that didn't come to light at some point, and this is a great, well-orchestrated showing of that. From what I've seen, no one's calling this a badly written pop album, rather they're calling it a pop album and then using that interchangeably with calling it a badly made album. But the pop heads aren't giving this the time of day either, so he's just left in this weird, critical purgatory. Not much to say here. Like with Waters, it's a great follow-up that just barely misses that instant classic appeal of its predecessor, but Jack's blend of pristine hooks and spurts of off-kilter insanity make Bleachers still one of the more unique acts in indie pop that, with Jack's pop clout, I'm surprised hasn't crossed over quite yet. Shut up, you love it too. And now onto the list proper. You know, comeback records are cool and all, but what I really get interested in are the follow-ups to the comeback. That true make or break to confirm whether a surprisingly strong comeback was just a fluke, or if that second wave is truly something to take seriously. And complete with the new, easier-to-explain band name, Outrage Is Now falls firmly into the latter. Of course, Death From Above's core sound is still there, with that setup it'd be impossible not to be, but here they pump those meaty bass lines and pounding drum progressions with a muscular hard rock edge and even some keyboard flourishes, just to spice up the mix and on occasion add some drama that wouldn't feel out of place on a mid-period Muse record, honestly. DFA is a distinct enough presence that they didn't need to push themselves necessarily, so let's just be glad they did.
I'm sorry for being sorry, that cause of anxiety, it's wasted on mine. This should never have been a crime.
Well, this one's a long time coming. Let me explain. You see, this emo 6 to 8 piece with the much less easy to explain band name has narrowly escaped my top list twice now. The only explanations may be that while both great records in this humble emo normie's opinion, Whatever If Ever's 1-minute tracks maybe could have used some development and harmlessness from how expansive it got, maybe meandered a little bit. Always Foreign, though, is exactly that kind of sharpening of their sound that I was hoping for. Like I alluded to, they've got a long roster attached, and they use that dynamic to its fullest here, leading to some incredible builds and crescendos with solid melodies to build them around, and especially with the stories of marginalization and betrayal bubbling under on a number of tracks here. When it does explode, you feel that catharsis, but the record's also brought back to earth with some more catchy, uplifting moments bordering on pop punk in a way that weirdly fits in. Definitely check this thing out.
And every night's the same. You keep on whispering his name.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2017's biggest pleasant surprise that you probably didn't know about. I mean, you guys saw the thrashing I gave Block Party's last album, right? And now you're telling me Kelly's return to form only a year and a half later? Well, yes, but not necessarily in the way you might think. See, like Hymns, Fatherland is barely a rock album, but instead of trading in that classic sound for limp drum machines and G major remix synth tones, you get Kelly's most organic sounding project to date. You get gorgeously lush acoustic numbers, more rhythmic jams with an old school R&B feel, an openly gay pop duet, and oh yeah, a trip to the goddamn 30s.
Forget those interest rates, they get in the way.
Now personally, I think the song's kinda awesome in its adorably goofy kinda way, but even if you're not down with every trail he goes down, you can't deny this record is inspired through and through. The next Block Party could be a Earth story, but let's cross that when we get to it.
Again on Tuesday.
Do your thing, don't care if you're making jealous. We're the kings, life is just a body balance. Just let him talk about it. Just let him talk about it. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it.
You know, for as much as the context really should be acknowledged to get that full picture of why this album's very existence is as powerful a statement as it is, even on its own merits, I can't think of a time a pop star has artistically revitalized themselves with this much drive and versatility. And no, it wasn't intentional for me to put this next to an album where I said fairly similar things, but that praise especially applies here. Kesha just finds this way of delving into the worlds of country and emotional pop balladry and hyperactive sugar-coated dance rock, and not dumbing down those genres sonically, but not totally disappearing into them either, to the point where it might come off like some cheap nostalgia grab for the critics. It's an incredibly authentic record that undeniably justifies its 14-track length. Welcome back, Kesha. Keep up the good work.
Cuando el hechizo viene ya, sobre el castigo sin pecar duele tanto.
And going straight from that staple, I feel like I gotta explain myself a bit on this one. You see, last year I happened upon this Argentinian singer-songwriter at the Music Tastes Good Festival in Long Beach, and picked up this record soon after. Now, Halo might seem like a random pick for my sensibilities, to put it mildly. Even putting the whole Spanish language barrier aspect aside, it's an incredibly challenging, mood-driven kind of record. If I had to stretch, I get maybe some Kid A in Rainbow's Radiohead vibes from the beatwork and guitar textures. I've also heard some Bjork comparisons thrown around. But putting all that aside, I just love the atmosphere running throughout this album that's somehow calming and uneasy in the same breath, with the Google Translate provided lyrics cryptically adding to that. And in a weird way, that language barrier only helps Juana's voice blend in as another instrument, providing some solid melodies to anchor all that experimentation. Again, an unexpected pick to say the least, but an incredibly rewarding one all the same. And now back to your regularly scheduled white angsty rock stuff. I heard of this band here and there in that whole scene, but really got intrigued seeing them open for Bayside. And yeah, I'm a fan of this for a lot of the same reasons as with Vacancy. Now, contrary to that very condescending little intro I just gave there, this album may straddle the line between pop punk and the steadier side of straight punk rock, and come with all the pissed off firepower to pull that off. But more than anything, After the Party carries with it a sense of world-weary maturity from the perspective of a punk past his prime, looking around and finding that he and the people around him didn't live up to what he'd hoped for. It's equal parts bleak, occasionally funny in a twisted kind of way, and earnestly uplifting at a couple points too. If this is resonating with me now at 21, I'm just gonna safely assume that come 2029, it'll be an all-time favorite.
I don't care what people think, I'm perfect in my psyche. Psych, bitch, I'm lying. I'm as insecure as most. Like a change in a blink, don't know what the future holds. Oh, me is stuck in the new one. Red pill, cause don't take the blue one.
I know it's weird to start outside of the music for this, but I struggle to think of an artist I had more fun being a fan of in 2017 than Amine. His whole aesthetic with the yellow and blue, his lazy-eyed, off-kilter sense of humor, and going far beyond the norm in hip-hop at his live shows, the guy just knows how to get people interested, and that's barely touching on the album, which only increased in replay value as the year went along. Good For You fulfills all that you can ask for in a fun, feel-good hip-hop album oozing with personality. Like, I just look at the vibrant, rubbery beats and instrumental textures, a good amount being self-produced, the versatility where he shows legit singing chops and a great ear for melody, going from goofy, charming pop rap to more introspective and intensely relatable territory, and I just wonder, when will America let him have a second damn hit? You're telling me that Kodak Black, 21 Savage, and goddamn 6ix9ine are more fitting of lasting chart prominence more than Amine? This is why I stopped hit songs videos and don't.
Paparazzi after my shows asking me questions. God fed up with my soul, so ain't no blessings. Happiness can't be bought a soul, I learned my lesson. Now I see what fame will really get you.
I've had a really unique issue with the Big K.r.i.t projects I've heard in the past. Like, he's an incredibly smart rapper and producer, but he had this way of contradicting himself track to track, going from anthems about spiritual fulfillment and not conforming to shallow rap tropes to my shrunk pussy pop. Like, I loved a lot of his stuff, but found it hard to get behind him as a whole artist because, honestly, I wasn't even sure what he thought he was as an artist. So imagine my shock when he turns around and crafts an ambitious as hell double album based around acknowledging that exact dichotomy. And this new self-awareness isn't just lampshading either, no. The songs on their own merits are some of his most distinctly personal, cleverly written, and immaculately produced to date. And hell, even the more lighthearted brag bangers that dominate the first disc are way more fun than in the past. This is an expertly drawn picture of a multifaceted, flawed guy that hits pretty much every target and message it aims for. Fantastic, well-rounded record that really any kind of rap fan can easily get something out of. It's always funny when someone's issues with an album are the exact reasons you love it.
What is happening? It's like James just found out about of Montreal. It's like they've been there the whole time, and then he's like, "Whoa, this of Montreal band. There's something to what they're doing here. There's something to it, I swear." It's like you just listen to everything from Satanic Panic in the Attic to Skeletal Lamping, and was like, "Okay, let's make an album now."
And to that good melon, I say, yep, pretty much.
There's a million things that are supposed to be. Shelter in the nighttime, a punk running free. And if it gets too deep, I reach for my guitar. And if I try hard,
I've never not enjoyed a Shins album, but I've never been so compelled to play an album of theirs over and over again, just to pick up on all the fun little production quirks and vibe out to easily James's most vibrant, colorful, and infectious outing to date. The song Half a Million in particular might be the most I've identified with the song all year, complete with a mind-boggling video that doesn't have nearly the views it deserves, by the way. The songs are more immediate but never come across as dumbed down. James and crew just tore down that indie veneer, got weird, and made an incredibly entertaining and, in my opinion, incredibly underappreciated record. Actually, screw what I said about Beck. This is the most misunderstood album of 2017, though this might be for more personal reasons. See, you guys might know the backstory behind this record as being inspired by the families of the band members dealing with cancer. Meanwhile, stretching that old disease umbrella a bit, right now I'm actually in the finishing stages of an EP I'll be putting out through my Fully Involved project revolving around my type 1 diabetes. And guys, let me tell you, from my perspective, Mastodon's depictions of chronic illness, masterfully told through an allegorical story of a wanderer in the desert being slowly killed by a supernatural sultan, it's so emotionally stirring I had to pause at multiple points just to take it all in. Through that imagery, they perfectly captured that despair-filled acceptance that this is how your life is now, that relief that comes once you find through a diagnosis what the hell's been wrong with your body, those moments of frustration where you fall off only to deeply regret it and pay the consequences later, all these little nuances of pathos that, with all the fantastical metaphor in the world, come off incredibly genuine and never approach the idea that it's just exploited for dark subject matter fodder. On top of that, that signature triple vocal interplay gives this album so much in the way of dynamics, the musicianship and pristine guitar tones as prominent as ever, and the moments of accessibility make these odes to pulling through trials like a chronic illness a populist rallying cry for anyone that might be going through it. It wouldn't work if it sounded like Remission or even Crack the Sky. It needed that universality while not sacrificing any of their stylistic integrity. Everything about this record was a tough undertaking, and I applaud them so much for it. Maybe blurs together a little bit in the back half, which is why it's not number one, but an amazing record all the same. Okay, let's move on to something a little less existential and talk about this awesome little punk debut. You don't see a lot of bands establishing themselves this distinctly and confidently right out of the gate, in this case fusing earworm hooks and harmonies, reminiscent of Stixie's girl groups more than anything else, with righteous fury in the tempos and messages. Really though, if I made a list of the top 5 get the hell away from me you creepy condescending dickwad anthems of 2017, selections from this record would take up at least 4 spots, plus any punk album that can run 50 minutes and never get stale, and any punk band that can get the thumbs up from both LA hipsters and my mom has to be doing something right. Like with Amine, this is just a fun act to be a fan of, and I can't wait for whatever it is they do next. And while I'm talking about the regrets, I'd just like to extend a little PSA. See hacky music publications, take note. I didn't harp on their age, and still talked about how awesome the music is. They're a band with people who care. Now is that so hard? I kinda touched on this with the Shins, but for me, reverb-soaked indie rock can be what seamless makes stand out track to track. But this Canadian group brings all the variety, songwriting chops, and ear-grabbing melodies to pull it off fantastically. Whether sounding like a more energized beach house or a more chilled out Regrets, frontwoman Molly Rankin ties it all together with a dreamy vocal presentation and a charmingly nuanced sense of storytelling. It's not a revolutionary record by any means, but it just hits all those little sweet spots for me, you know?
But much as I believe I can't see, all I ever see in him is me. All I ever see in him is me.
On a somewhat similarly chill note, I'd call this the best soundtrack for quiet introspection you'll find all year. I've been a fan of Gillette since coming across her on an opening slot in 2013, and 4 years after her debut, Water and a Whale, I can safely say this fall was worth it, even surpassing it in my opinion. Here, the more polished side of that record is replaced with the more organic, deceptively low-key vibe. Dave Cobb produced this thing, and he lends it all the warmness of a timeless country or folk LP, only with more piano and absolutely none of the kitsch. I got a real kick out of all the little ways she twists song structures around without taking out the accessibility. And I love the arc this record goes on lyrically. The way she dissects these little disconnects in relationships with lovers and family members is sure to strike a chord in some way with anyone who listens to it. I know all you other music talking about type people on the internet know that feeling of, God, how don't more people know about this? Well, all I ever seen you as me is for sure my biggest example of that this year. Well, that, or... Okay, now we're getting into the records I was really annoying with people about, but for good reason. I've always liked this duo's unique hybrid of thick, meaty garage rock riffage and unhinged hardcore vocal stylings, but before it was more purely from their insane live show than being able to single out a track from the album. On this sophomore record though, it's a tighter, more controlled chaos, where the schizophrenic song structures tastefully balance out with more subdued, melodic moments that add a real emotional weight. Two Parts Viper explores depth from all angles, from agonizing over how you're going to be remembered, to the heart-wrenching process of coping when someone else goes, even some moments when it's a subtle or looming presence in the background. I emphasize all this because, guys, let's be real, this ain't a genre you generally look to for sad boy relatability. I actually wrote about these guys' live show for my first article on the OC Music League, link in the description, but yeah, this thing blew me back, big time. So, this begs the question of what could be my number one. Well, what other than... All I need from you now. Okay, I kid, but please, for the love of God, give this thing a listen. I need the Bandcamp streams. Anyway, the tricky thing about 2017, honestly, is that while by no means was it short on great material, unlike with 2016, it didn't really provide any records that outright changed my life, or I could picture in like a top 10 of all time in the future, you know? So it became more of a question of what album did I just revisit the most, get the most unabashed pleasure out of as a listener. And well, I've talked about garage rock duos, I've talked about records following a 5-year gap that deserve way more love, and I've talked about Canadians. So, here you go.
An age is a traitor and bit by bit, less lust for life, more talking shit. But remember there's heaven in the hellest of holes, and a drink for the body is a dream for the soul.
As much as this kinda flies directly into the face of that statement about the past couple of years I just made like 30 seconds ago, if I was gonna compare this to any of my past album of the years, honestly, this reminds me the most of Bayside's Vacancy, in that it's just the sound of a band honing that distinct sound they've established while expanding it in all the right places. Again, 5 years removed from Celebration Rock, and these guys pack that same earnest, anthemic bombast into another densely packed 8 tracks in 35 minutes, only with a wider sonic palette to dissuade any detractor who might dismiss them as one note before. You got the title track's autobiographical affirmations about leaving your hometown to pursue your musical dreams, pop-punk pizza party style up in here, yeah, that's right, Northeast Southwest as a heartfelt ode to traveling and homesickness, a handful of heartwarmingly earnest mid-fi love songs, the seedy pictures painted in the epic 7.5-minute synth-ridden arc of Bar, and the closer in A Body Like a Grave as a wise reminder that all those experiences make you who you are. This is music to take that next step to and make a bold life decision to, which I needed a high quality soundtrack for so badly this year. Like I alluded to with Death from Above, it's a victory if a comeback passes the level of solid but not on the same level. Japandroids not only reached that level of a celebration rock, but arguably surpassed it. If nothing else, you gotta appreciate that, and it's only another reason why Near to the Wild Heart of Life is my favorite album of 2017. So yeah, thanks for getting all the way through this. I gotta be honest, writing this was a daunting task, but I'm glad I did it. That said, I don't see myself making another video on this channel for a good while, mostly because of all the other stuff I'm doing right now. I will say the podcast is still going strong, even if we're in the middle of a bit of changing of hands and how things operate behind the scenes, and it might come out a little bit less often. I'll keep you updated on all that. I'm also writing a good deal for the Orange County Music League, doing at this point a couple interviews with local bands a week on their website. But probably most importantly right now for me, I'm in the finishing stages of the new EP from Fully Involved. Links to everything, all the information to keep up with that, including my album from last year, all that's in the description. Actually, after this is out, I'm gonna be starting to edit vlogs together from the making of that EP. Some really good stuff I managed to get in there. I'll also start getting a lot more active on that Twitter at Fully Involved SD, so if you're following my ramblings already at MarkMadSounds, I highly recommend following both. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.